Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Health in Tech with Amanda Nystrom, National Health Board Certified Health and Wellbeing Coach. Amanda, what are we talking about today?
Hey, JD. Today we are talking about question thinking and how that relates to stress management.
Well, what the hell is that? There's a question for you.
So one of the things that I was taught in coaching by Duke Medical School is essentially you ask how and what questions, like open-ended questions, in order to promote or I guess encourage more of a detailed response. Usually when you ask closed-ended questions like, do you have, or is there something? If you were to take it literally, which most of us don't anymore, you promote a single-worded answer. And so one of the things that we're taught is to lean into the open-ended questions. Now, why that is all relevant is because one of the books that I was encouraged to read is called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by, I'm trying to find her name, Marilee Adams. And what Marilee Adams suggests in this is that at any point, our questions, the questions that we ask ourselves dictate our mindset, and our mindset dictates our reality.
I can buy into that.
Yeah. And I had not really thought of it this way when I was reading the book or going through the coaching training. I liked open-ended questions. But what Marilee Adams goes into is essentially a choice map, and that we have at any point, we're in one of two options. We're either in a judge mindset or a learner mindset.
Well, I like that because when you were talking about the questions you're asking yourself, define your reality. Very simple. Lots of people do this. Why am I so stupid?
Mm.
Versus what is it I need to change to figure this problem out?
Yeah. And
So, for example, what is it that you need to to change to be comfortable asking for help?
so for context, for other people not in this room, we have been wanting to do a series about why it's so hard to ask for help, especially in tech. And we were talking about it earlier today, and JD just said that I am what did you say? The case study for this?
The case study for this problem,
I
yes.
was saying I had a hard time asking for help. And
I've never personally experienced this with her.
Your sarcasm is dripping. So back on topic. Exactly what you said. The asking yourself the question of like, why am I so stupid, or why did I make that mistake, is it dictates our mindset. And that, it dramatically shifts how we experience life, which tends to turn into stress. And I want to give you some examples that I pulled from the book, which is like, if we're asking ourselves, whose fault is it? Why am I a failure? So questions like that, they're reactive, they're defensive, and they lead to higher stress. Whereas if we ask things like, what happened and what are my choices? This is a proactive and curious mindset, aka, according to this book, the learner side of things. And it leans into forward momentum.
Well, and yes, in a technical mindset, one way to consider this would be you're evaluating the problem, right? If you're in a judgment mindset, you're not evaluating the problem. You're beating up yourself, essentially, right? It's not, you have to turn the problem to an opportunity.
Yeah.
That's how you switch from the negative judgmental mindset to the positive learning mindset, is that whatever it is that happened, you turn it into an opportunity. And from a leadership role, a good way to consider this is there's no such thing as failure if you learned from it, right? And that is something people struggle with, especially in tech. Tech individuals tend to be highly intelligent. And there has
Yeah.
been study after study after study that has shown that the more intelligent you are, the higher capacity for intelligence that you have, the more likely you are to suffer from things like depression and substance abuse and other things like that. And one of the ways you could probably challenge those negatives, the costs of intelligence, is to use a word that you like to use a lot, is to reframe your judgment to an opportunity.
Yeah. And I, we all get stuck in this judger path. I mean, this
Yeah.
mindset. And I mean, I spent many years in it. Just it was the way I lived, and I didn't even realize it because it's just the way that it happened. I mean, I think it started when I was a teenager, when we're all so kind to ourselves. And then it didn't really
And to each
end.
other. Don't forget, teenagers are so nice to each other, especially teenage girls. You guys are loyal and lift each other up. It's a big hippie fest.
Okay. Your experience is very different than mine, but okay. And I mean, it's kind of a human reflex, right? When we do something wrong, because I mean, like we talked about last episode, society tells us we can have it all. So when we don't actually have it all, we're just hard on ourselves and we judge everything about us. And that leads to judging others and judging our circumstances to the point where it's this vicious cycle. And it leads to a huge amount of stress.
Well, so if there is a slight difference here that we should discuss. It is okay to say, I made a mistake, right? That's not judging the issue. That is evaluating or observing a problem. And a lot of people will say, well, I was stupid, right? I did drink too much and drive. That is stupid. Okay. That's a logical conclusion, right? But the issue isn't that. The issue is, what can I learn from that mistake? Right? You have to switch the thinking because you will beat yourself up. And in terms of that, like you said, that essentially boils down to stress. And that type of stress equals bad.
Is threat-based stress.
Correct.
Which if you haven't listened to any other episodes, we were diving into the telomere effect by a Nobel Prize winner, Elizabeth Blackburn and Alyssa Appel, because I have it right here, and how threat-based stress is the kind of stress that is alarming, and it's the fight or flight, and it's what over time damages your cells. And challenge-based stress, which is the learner mindset here, is when you turn things into an opportunity. But we've went into that before, so I don't really want to focus on that much as tie it all together, right? And it's funny how everything is really related when it comes to our mindset. One thing that I wrote down that I really wanted to say is that when we ask ourselves things like, why does this always happen to me? Our brain answers by finding evidence of our victimhood, which spikes anxiety and cortisol.
So how do we fix that?
I'm glad you asked. The first thing that we have to notice it, and the specific examples that I have to pay attention to when you're listening to your thoughts, if you listen to your thoughts, is when your internal dialogue uses words like should, always, never, or if you're focused on blaming yourself or someone else. That's when you know that you're being a judge of the situation or of yourself, and you need to get yourself out of it.
Okay.
There are other
So
steps. That is not the full solution. I see your head.
it's kind of hard to miss my head. It's right in front of a camera. No, it's interesting that you say that because it kind of comes, I mean, from a broader spectrum, it's almost like you're talking about victim mentality.
That is one of the things that if you continue to have a judger mindset, that is something that will happen. It tends to happen.
So the more you do not take your circumstances and turn them into opportunities, a greater chance that you will likely become a victim in your own mind.
Yes.
Okay. Explains a lot from some people I know.
I mean, it's really people manifest things differently, right? So some people in the judger pit, to use the term from this book, some people don't necessarily become a victim. Some people become very confused or very arrogant, or I think arrogant is a really big one. And I think it leads to that term that we used in the telomere effect about hostility and how like pessimism and that type of thing. It's you're not always guaranteed to end up being a victim. But if you look at the questions that I'm going to go into in a minute about like what you typically hear in that mindset, a lot of it is victim mentality. A lot of it is not really taking responsibility or taking a step back. And it's all about me and not thinking about how we can make changes to make it a better situation for everybody involved.
So it's one, negative,
Yes.
right? It clearly a negative wave of energy that you are pushing into yourself. And two, a little narcissistic,
Yeah. Uh, yeah.
right? I mean, if you're making it all about yourself and not being able to say, okay, hold on, how can this be better? When you make it all about you, you're being a narcissist, and there is no good in that.
Yeah. And I mean, most of us don't like to think of ourselves as narcissists when we're blaming ourselves for things because we're already beating ourselves up. Um, so I wouldn't say that that's the way to get you through, like to transition from a judger path to a
No,
learner path.
no, obviously, that would be something that would be, after when you're, reflecting or being introspective on the condition or the situation, right? Um, but in this situation that we're talking about right now, what we have is viewers, and nobody wants to be a narcissist. Nobody wants to be a victim. And when you are able to communicate, look, this is what's actually happening, it may trigger a response if that starts to happen to someone who's watching, right? All of a sudden they go into judgmental mode and there's this trigger goes, whoa, hold on a second. I'm not going to be a victim. I'm not going to be a narcissist. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to observe. I'm going to turn this into an opportunity, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it goes back to one of those words to pay attention to in your internal dialogue. I never want to be a narcissist, or I would never be that, right? Using those types of words is when we need to check into our self-awareness of like what is actually going on. And then we need to hit the pause button to go back to a Megan, like especially if you hear those, but also like our body manifests stress. And so if you're going through the judgmental mindset and you feel like you're tight, your chest tighten, or you've got shallow breathing, or you start twitching, like if I'm sitting and my knee is bouncing, I know that there's something going on. Sometimes it's just discomfort, but sometimes it's my mind going. And that's your cue to really take a step back and assess, and evaluate and be honest with yourself. Like one of the worst things that we do is we're not honest with ourselves. And like you said, because nobody wants to be a narcissist, nobody wants to be the worst versions of themselves in that situation. But the only way that we can actually be a better self is when we have the courage to say to ourselves, not necessarily somebody else, but yeah, I'm being a judger right now and I am being a narcissist or I am being unfair. I need to take a step back. That is when you reclaim your power. Otherwise, you're just a victim of your own autopilot.
Hmm. It's funny you said I'm being a judger right now. I would never say that, but I would say, hold on a second, I'm being an asshole.
Yeah.
Uh, you know? So, yeah. So it is a little different for everybody, based on, who they are, but, self-awareness is key, right? What were the other words or sentences that you were talking about?
Yeah. So once you have taken the moment to figure out your cue, your trigger words that's going on to notice that you're in the judger path or mindset. You hit the pause, you acknowledge what's going on, and then you use switching questions, which, to use a phrase that you used earlier, is just reframing. But it's a tactic, a strategy that really works, and it works in business as well, is when you take, like, when you feel overwhelmed and like you're not getting anywhere, intentionally forcing your brain to think in a different way. You take something that you asked and switch it to something else. It can change the entire dynamic. An example that I have is, like, why is this workload so impossible? Switching that to, what is the most important thing to tackle right now? Those are two very different strategies for addressing something.
It's not why is this workload so impossible? It's what is my priority? Singular.
Yeah. Or, like, why is my boss so difficult? If you switch that to, what is my boss actually trying to achieve here? I know for me, that would make a world of difference when I'm frustrated with my boss. And then another one that is close to my heart,
I
like,
slide in there.
why did I mess up? Switch that to, what can I learn from this mistake to do it better next time?
Yeah, all of these, if we distill it down, all of these are what can I do differently for a positive outcome, right? That's what all of these are. It's basic, it people like inspirational speakers and pastors and things like that. They like to talk about things like the power of positive thinking. And it's a challenge because, one, if someone says to you, you got to think positively, what you want to do is rip their larynx out. So that's a bit of a challenge, but there is absolutely an energy that is derived mentally from it. A perfect example. Why do you listen to depressing songs when you go through a breakup? Right? You connect to those songs because they reinforce the feelings that you're having. But on the flip, and that can be healthy, don't get me wrong. But there's a point where you need to switch the tempo. You have to be able to go from Taylor Swift and all her bad boyfriends to whatever makes you happy when you're in the car and you're singing your heart out. You know, the same thing applies here. When you're in a situation where you're in the judger pit, you've got to be able to break out of that through positive thinking, and that's where the opportunity comes from.
Mm-hmm. That's where you switch damaging stress to challenge-based. And one of the ways that you do this is to switch your mindset from accusation to curiosity. Like, if you want it distilled down.
So you make your mindset functionable.
Yes, thank you for throwing that in my face again.
So, folks, if you're listening, Amanda is determined to get a new word added to the dictionary, and it's functionable. And I'm all for it because we obviously are a society now where, Google is a verb. So have at it. Make it functionable. Is there any others that we want to bring up before we close out?
I think the main thing here, when it comes to why it's important to reframe our questions and to switch into that learner mindset, is that stress thrives on, like, the feelings of helplessness. I can't do it, or what if? And learner questions, if we can make that switch, they focus on what's inherently in our control. And that's when we can actually make a difference. And, you mentioned victim mentality, and there's a lot that goes into that. And, I would never be a victim. I'm not, but we all have those things that push us over the edge into that judger mindset. And the truth of it, though, is if we learn to make that switch, we can't really be deeply curious and deeply stressed at the same time. And so if we lean into curiosity, which a lot of us have innately, we just tend to bury it, especially with our jobs, then it almost naturally diffuses the emotional intensity of stress. And it enables us to have a whole other experience that we haven't had because we've been just cycling in this judger pit. And I believe that we all have the ability to make those changes because it's all in our head, right? It's all in the environments that we can control.
All right, folks, we're going to close out with this. Amanda's advice is act like a child and always ask why. This has been another episode of Health and Tech with Amanda Nystrom, National Health Board certified health and well-being coach.